Afternoon. Charles Gibbon, most of us know him as Charlie. He was born and raised in West Virginia. He has degrees in chemistry from West Virginia Wesleyan, meteorology from Texas A&M, an MS in atmospheric and solar physics from Michigan, so he's been around. He had a career in the Air Force. I think there's probably some other Air Force people in the room, Charlie. He had combat missions in Korea and the Vietnam War. And then he taught school for 15 years here in Manhattan, high school. And this is his 19th year as a volunteer in the Konza Prairie, and he's currently our historian. So he has gotten very involved in learning about the families that grew up in that area. And Charlie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
As to what I'm called, after being in the military for a career and teaching in high school for a career, I've been called a lot of things. So whatever you say, I've probably heard worse. Well, recognize this photo that's up here? It's on Konza.
It's like one I've seen somewhere, but I can't recall it.
Were you in the Boy Scouts earlier? No? Well, we stuck this photo up here just to have something to fill up the screen while we were getting started. It's part of an old Boy Scout camp that's on Konza, and about all that's left is this fireplace. So it really has very little to do with what I'm going to say. It was just stuck up there.
It's on Konza. I've probably seen it out there because I used to drive cattle out of where the Dewey Ranch now is.
Well, you know where the Konza Lane is out there? When you first go in to Konza from Konza Lane and you turn east, I'm sorry, you go straight on south, it's right up in that draw. And the Boy Scouts had a camp there until the people who bought the ranch decided they didn't want the Boy Scouts, so they said no, and all that's left is this. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to take off my jacket. It's getting kind of warm already. Before we get started on the families, I would like to say just a little bit about the way things were when the earliest families came here. This is a map of the Kansas Territory when the counties were first formed. And you can see that Riley County ends at the river. Well, where is Konza? On the other side of the river. So when the counties were first formed, Konza was in Davis County. Davis County? Ain't no Davis County. You're right, it's Geary County. Not only that, but if you look just east of Raleigh, you'll see another county that's no longer there. Calhoun County? Do I need this thing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Calhoun County. What's there now? Pot County. That's where I live. Well, you'll also see Richardson County in there. And you know Richardson County now either. What's there? Wabunsee. Why the change?
Civil War.
You got it. This came about in 1854 when Kansas first officially became a territory. They formed counties. Initially, the people in the state of Kansas had Southern sympathies, and they named counties for Southerners, like Calhoun and Richardson and Breckenridge and Weller, Wise, Davis, all good old Southern names. But then the Yankees came in and took over, and they said, we can't have this, so they changed the names of all the counties. Not all of them, but the ones that had Southern names. Well, I bring that up just because Konza, when it first had its, when it first came to life, so to speak, not as Konza, but just as property that could be settled on. It was in Davis County. And that's about all I wanted out of this chart anyway. Well, in case someone doesn't know exactly where Konza is located, Manhattan up there and Konza down here. Just go south about 10 miles on McDowell Creek Road and you're there. For those of you who have lived, by the way, how many have lived or worked on Konza? I don't talk about you, Joe.
I drove cattle out of there through the rail yard
Where to in the rail yards?
into Manhattan, out to the railroad, the stockyard that was on the east side of the river.
The Fairmont edition. Right. Okay, we'll be talking about that in a few minutes too, because one of the people we're talking about had a dairy farm there and produced as much as 5,000 pounds of butter one year. So Fairmont was quite a place. And this chart is merely to show the original owners of Konza, of what is now Konza. As you can see, there were a lot of small acreages there, but they were all consolidated under one name finally. If I gave you a list, or if I asked you to name me, say, 2 people in the history of the founding of the city of Manhattan, what names would you give me? Who can give me a name? Founder of Manhattan.
Where? Good now.
Where? That's one. Good now? That's another one. Well, let me read you off something here. How about a man who was the co-founder of the First National Bank? He owned and operated a livery stable. For you youngsters, what's a livery stable? Where you rent horses, right? Or where you keep horses. Started the first sewer system in Manhattan. Helped finance the first telephone exchange. Owned and operated an ice plant. And I'll guarantee you that this wasn't electrically generated ice. They cut the ice off the river, put it up. He had rental houses. As a matter of fact, when he died and they probated his will, he had something like 252 city lots in Manhattan, some of them, many of them, with houses on them for rent. He had a livestock sales pavilion, and his crowning piece of work was the Lake Eureka Resort. Have you ever heard of the Lake Eureka Resort in Manhattan? About toward the airport. And there used to be a lake there where the river had curved up to the north and then cut through and left a crescent lake. Matter of fact, the resort sometimes was called Crescent Beach. So this gentleman had all of that, yet he's not one of the Manhattan founders. If you talk to people, you know, he's not listed. Because he never became a citizen of Manhattan. He kept his citizenship in Chicago. He voted in Chicago, he had businesses in Chicago, but boy, did he have an effect on Manhattan. Okay, Joe, you can tell me his name now.
Charles P. Dewey.
What was it?
Charles.
Charles Paulson Dewey, D-E-W-E-Y. I made up a little jingle. No, I won't say it. But C.P. Dewey, he went by C.P. rather than Charles Paulson. In those days, that was a mark of achievement if you went by your initials, J.P. Morgan, and like that. So C.P. Dewey was born to money. His family in Ohio, he was born in Ohio in 1843. His family in Ohio owned 2 banks and an iron foundry. So C.P. grew up with wealth. He was working in one of the banks in 1871 when Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over the lantern. Remember that incident? I barely do. I'm getting kind of old. Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over the lantern, started the hay on fire. The hay started the barn burning. The barn started the house burning, and the house started the one next to it burning, and the whole shebang, city, burned down. So old C.P. Dewey took what money he could come up with. I won't say beg, borrow, or steal because he didn't do any stealing, but he did do some borrowing. He went out to Chicago and bought up the bargains while they were still hot, almost literally. And a bunch of businesses. And he gave up his job in the bank in Ohio and moved to Chicago and became quite a businessman. Well, he sold his lots that he bought for almost nothing for a nice house. You know, he was a good businessman. He knew how to make money. You buy cheap and sell high. Nothing to it. So he took what money he made on those lots in Chicago and came out to Kansas and started buying property. The first piece he bought was in 1872 and it was only about 120 acres. But he kept buying a little piece here and a little piece there as they became available, but not only here, out in western Kansas, Cheyenne County, he started buying out there too. Well, I doubt that anyone here remembers the winter of 1886 and 87. I barely do. It was a tough winter. It was known as the winter of the big die-up because all the livestock were killed. Dewey held mortgages on an awful lot of the property that you see here. And being a good businessman, he foreclosed. They couldn't sell dead livestock. Mortgage payments came due. Tough. In that one year, Dewey picked up about 5,500 acres here in Riley, and well, it was still Davis County then. So, as an upshot, there were about 11,000 acres that Dewey owned here in Riley and Gary, Davis counties. And out in western Kansas, he owned about 64,000 acres and leased another 200,000. Okay? Well, he had a son. His son's name was Chauncey. Chauncey was a young man, about 22 years of age, and about 21 in 1899. The CP brought old Chauncey out here, no ranching experience at all. Brought him out here and put him in charge of that big ranch out in western Kansas. Chauncey was a big, handsome young man, had a good opinion of himself. And the acreage that they owned and leased out in western Kansas was not all in one big chunk. There was one big chunk which